up, sports fans? Your favorite sportsbook, BetUS.com, is back for our 28th year of NFL action. With the industry's biggest sign-up bonus of up to 200%, BetUS offers our members the opportunity to cash in on all your favorite sports, including NFL, NBA, MLB, and more. We've also got hundreds of new casino games, including the coolest new European slots, and our live dealers are waiting for you at the table. Sign up at BetUS.com today to get into the action. BetUS, where the game begins.
And now, broadcasting live from Las Vegas, the Snake Sports Talk Show with Jake Silva starts now.
All right, here we go, ladies and gentlemen. It is a new week when we are live on a Monday here in Denver, Colorado. This is the Snake Sports Talk Show, wherever and however you may be watching and listening. Thanks for making us part of your day. I am excited for a few reasons, because lots of stuff going on in the NFL, and also we are not done talking college talk. I got my good friend and guest here on the show, Connor Happer, joining us here to talk Nebraska, to talk Braden. We are excited for tonight's show, and also Oilers and the Panthers tonight. It's going to be exciting all the way around, and usually this, I think this series has been incredible. It's tied up, and I just have a good feeling Florida's going to come away with this game here tonight. No Chase tonight, but he will be back here on Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. We got extra shows here for you guys here tonight. But I do want to start off with this, because I know I talked a little bit about Aaron Rodgers as far as going to the Pittsburgh Steelers. So it is a 1 year, and with the corrected sources, it's about 13 and a half. That could round up to 20 million at the end of it. And look, I'm not mad at the signing at all. I think, to me personally, Aaron Rodgers, you kind of are going to get what you're going to get. Now, does this mean this puts the Pittsburgh Steelers over the top? I think, truthfully, this could be a 10-7, maybe a 9-8 win team. And the reason of this is because it's not the cadence. It's also not about, the strength of the defense, and not to mention just the roster itself. But you have to put into consideration, that's a young offensive line that has to protect an aged quarterback. And to me personally, I think the star power from Aaron Rodgers has started to fade. But it's not a bad thing. I think ultimately is that we know what Aaron Rodgers is. I've watched the documentary several times with Enigma, and he's welcomed us into his life. But the thing that I focus on is the Pittsburgh Steelers, because once again, like I said last week, you cannot go into the season with Baltimore twice a year, Cleveland twice a year, and Cincinnati twice a year, mediocre at quarterback in the most important spot on your offense. You can't be that way. And that's why they went and got Russell Wilson last year, because they knew they needed a quarterback that was going to throw it up to a lot of their offensive weapons. Now you've lost George Pickens to Dallas, so now you got to end up picking the pieces from here. But I will say this, Pittsburgh, it is very interesting when you look at the breakdown of the schedule, because initially there are going to be some rocky spots up from there, but maybe it gets better probably later in the season. But all I hope is that the Pittsburgh Steelers, they understand and they learn from this situation for a few reasons, because in the last few seasons, since Mike Tomlin's been the head coach, they have been middle of the pack in the NFL draft for several years, and they've been stuck in purgatory ever since. When they drafted their quarterback, Kenny Pickett, were they going to pass that up? They were keeping a local kid, and I like Kenny Pickett. I think he's a good kid. But we all knew what Kenny Pickett was later on in his career, and now he's fighting for the starting job in Cleveland. But Pittsburgh, they need to get this right at quarterback. Since they've had Big Ben, there has been no possible protege to step in once he's retired. They didn't figure that out. And I think that's what's going to be a problem for them. I said this before, and people pretty much put my face on the wanted sign in all the street corners in Pittsburgh when I said you're better off to trade away TJ Watt to get some accumulation of picks back. And at the same time, you're going to be at the top of the draft list so that way you can get a quarterback. You can get a top-tier offensive lineman. Maybe you could go and get a top-tier running back if things don't work out with Jaylen Warren and Caleb Johnson. But I think Caleb Johnson does have a bright future here. But the point is that if you do not have the quarterback that is capable of giving your offense 25-plus points a game, you're going to struggle in a lot of those trench warfare games. And a lot of it is going to be leaned, once again, on the defense to have to do their job. And who knows if that defense stays healthy. That's the one thing I'm crossing my fingers, and I'm with Pittsburgh fans on this, because the minute you lose TJ Watt, the minute you end up losing a pivotal piece of your defense, that Pittsburgh Steelers team is not going to look the same, especially when you have to play on important weeks you cannot lose, especially against Cleveland, especially against Cincinnati, and even Baltimore, which is why it's honestly the most battle-hardened division in all of football in the AFC North, because they're back and forth, and depending on their strength of their schedule, and not to mention where it lands at and who their opponent is, because if they end up playing a division rival in like a Thursday, a Saturday game, I don't know if they'll be prepared for that. It's short weeks rest. So that's the one thing Pittsburgh has to understand. But again, I think Aaron Rodgers gives them a fighting chance, and we know that Aaron Rodgers in the last few seasons, he's tried to not be mistake prone. We know what he is. He's all about his efficiency when passing the ball. He's got a very good touch whenever he has to throw those spirals and over the top. And I think if you give him the right components and him and Arthur Smith, they're on the same page, maybe, just maybe, Pittsburgh could prove me wrong from here. So last week I had a really good cast of some great guests that were coming up on here, and we talked a lot about college football, and we are continuing to talk about it because I'm just cannot wait for this college football season. It's exciting. And the other thing is, too, we might get a chance to end up talking a little bit more about college basketball, the NIL, and the transfer portal. So joining us to talk more about that and Locked On with them Nebraska Huskers, here's Connor Happer here joining us on the show. So, Connor, I've been smelling something brewing here in Nebraska in the last couple of seasons now since Matt Rule took the job. And I like Matt Rule because I've seen what he's done in his tenure at Temple and in Baylor, and to come back into college football and to bring a new culture to Nebraska, because I haven't seen Nebraska really kind of be themselves since the dominance of the 90s. So to kind of bring that back and yet have a promising future at their quarterback position, I think this is one that even in the Big Ten, they really got to end up competing throughout their schedule. So it's going to be a tougher challenge from here. But how do you outlook the Nebraska season this upcoming season, especially with the new changes happening with the college football playoffs?
Yeah. Jake, thanks for having me. First of all, it's going to be an interesting year. That's for sure. You mentioned, in both of Matt Rule's last two stops in the college game, that's not including his time with the Carolina Panthers. In the second year, they got a lot better. The last year was Matt Rule's second year. I think they did get a lot better. They got 2 wins better last year, 1 in the regular season. They got a bowl game win last year. And then in the third year, it really pops, and they're competing for conference championships. I think that's the thing that people around here are sort of holding on to right now. They've taken a little bit of a different path, I think, to put themselves in that position this time around. In the first 2 go-arounds at Temple and Baylor, they really played a lot of young guys, and then just kind of let them roll for year 1, year 2. And then by that third year, it was all the same guys that have been playing for 20 plus games who are back and trying to get them in competition. And they did. This one's a little bit different. I think in the third year here at Nebraska, they've turned to the transfer portal quite a bit. Obviously, they got Dylan Raiola, you mentioned, at quarterback in his second year, and people have really high expectations for him. And he's a really talented player who they need to take a jump this year. They've made changes at coordinator spots. They've brought in a new special teams coordinator. There's all this different stuff going on with college football. So it's there's a lot of different things about this third year compared to his other third years, but I do think people around here still hope and think that it could pop in year 3.
What's kind of like, what's more of the focal point with this team as far as, because again, you're playing in a conference where it's more trench warfare than anything else. You got to be physical. You got to have a very good defense. And at the same time, run game is very crucial, especially in this conference. So is there kind of some focuses, either offense or defense that Nebraska would like to improve in coming into the season that they left off of from last season?
Yeah, they've been pretty defense heavy for the last 2 years. And I think a lot of that was probably due to their shortcomings on offense. The first year, Rule brought in Jeff Sims, who came from Georgia Tech at the time, and it really just didn't work out at all. He was a turnover machine and ended up getting hurt, and it did not work out. And he ended up transferring out of the program and ended up being the backup. I believe he's the backup now at Arizona State. And so that didn't work. They turned to Heinrich Harburg in that first year. And he sort of was just a running threat, really. I mean, the offense was not really a factor in that first year. Last year, Dylan Raiola as a freshman, takes the reins a little bit, and you start to see some movement early on in the season, and then it got bogged down in the middle part. They brought in Dana Holgerson, who is, a longtime offensive mind, former head coach at Houston, most recently, obviously known for his time in West Virginia. And right when he took over in the last 4 games of the regular season, there was kind of this thing that started to click a little bit. So while they lost a lot of personnel on defense from last year, maybe they can, maybe if they take a small step back in that category, I think they expect a giant step forward on offense. It's been really not up to par over the last couple of years. Last year was okay. But under Dana Holgerson with Dylan Raiola at quarterback and a couple pretty good wide receivers like Dane Key, who they brought in from Kentucky, and Isaiah Hunter from Cal, and then Ja'Cory Barney coming back from last year, and a pretty good running back in Emmett Johnson, who really came on at the end of last year as well. I think they could be a pretty good offense. So hopefully they can take a pretty big jump and then stay on par defensively. Matt Rule has said before, we're always going to be a defensive kind of centric program. We're always going to be good at defense at Nebraska. So far in his career, that's ended up being the case. But this is his first chance to have a pretty dang good offense.
So backpedaling back to Dylan Raiola, because we've seen in the first year some promises of what he'll look like in the near future here in Nebraska. And again, I think this kid, he's something else. He's got a very good arm. I think he also has some pretty good touch on the football and could really distribute it well. I think he got a good taste of what the first year really looked like for him. Is there something we should expect now from year 2, more of just the experience-wise now going into this? Because I look at the schedule, and you got a pretty good hefty homestand, and including, with Michigan in the middle of that. Is that kind of something he is backing off of from last year, now going into this year, like, hey, we now have a completely different identity on offense. Now it's time to really kind of get ourselves on the gas pedal here to get this offense rolling.
Yeah, I don't think there's any doubt about it. The stats were pretty pedestrian last year. He only threw for 13 touchdowns, ended up throwing 11 interceptions, just under 3,000 yards over 13 games. The completion percentage was good. He didn't push the ball down the field as much, especially in the first half of the season under the previous offensive coordinator, Marcus Satterfield, as kind of everybody around here thought that he can and they would. So they were just a little bit conservative. So in the last 4 games of last year, when Dana Holgerson took over, it was more crisp. You start to see some quicker decision making, and I think for Dylan, he's taken a lot on now in the leadership category. It really is starting to feel like his team, which is always a good sign for a quarterback, and they've kind of built around him as well. So I think if everything goes according to plan for them, he's a guy who could be, toward the top of the Big Ten in terms of the quarterbacks that are out there. You think of Drew Aller, who's at the top at Penn State, and then I don't know. I think there's some open space there. The quarterback at Ohio State, whoever it might be, is going to end up being pretty good. The quarterback at Oregon, And Dante Moore is going to end up being pretty good. Those guys don't have, a lot of experience yet, but we're talking about, 5-star type of players. But Dylan Raiola is that as well. So I feel like they think they can really, really take a jump this year. If you're throwing stats on it, 20, 25 touchdowns, keep that interception number down as well, and be a guy who throws for, a few hundred yards a game, right? We're talking about 3,500 yards and that type of thing. So he's certainly capable of that. It just kind of has to all come together for him.
If there is if you could think of any player, either offense or defense, that, because I try to evaluate this, especially going into the NFL draft every single year. But if there is a potential breakout player on this roster, is there anybody that does come to mind to keep an eye out for that can be an X factor for Nebraska this season?
Yeah, like I said, I think you'll end up hearing a lot about a couple of the transfers that they brought in this offseason. Dane Key, really productive wide receiver at Kentucky over the last couple of years. One of their top guys. He came over with Nebraska's new wide receiver coach, DeKeel Shorts, who was handpicked by Dana Holgerson to coach the wide receiver. So that's a change that they have there, and he'll be, if everything goes according to plan, he'll be Nebraska's top guy. I mentioned Hunter already, Barney. So there's a few wide receivers right there who I think are pretty dynamic playmakers. Emmett Johnson at the running back spot is a guy that not a lot of people have heard about, but a really consistent producer. People around here are really looking forward to seeing what he brings to the table when he gets more consistent touches. He finally got that in the back half of last season. And then defensively, my mind goes to a couple more transfers. Dasan McCullough, who had started his career at Indiana, ended up at Oklahoma, dynamic, pass rusher type where you could put him on any level of the defense and he could compete. And then they have some really experienced players in the secondary. Deshaun Singleton is going on his 6th year. A guy who really came on at the end of last year as well was Sear Wright. He's a transfer from USC and got here late last summer before the season, so wasn't really much of a factor at the beginning of the season, and then came along and is the type of guy who, if he continues to build off that, could be pushing for all Big Ten and those type of honors. Andrew Marshall is another corner they got out of the transfer portal. They got another linebacker out of the transfer portal named Marcus Watson Trent from Georgia State or Georgia Southern, I believe. I'm sorry. And, so that's what, 4 or 5 transfers right there who they think can make a pretty significant impact, especially on the defensive side of the ball. And so that's what they needed to do. They lost a lot of experience from last year. They lost Ty Robinson, who was drafted in the mid rounds by the Philadelphia Eagles. He was that kind of their guy last year, and they depended on him a lot. And Nash Hutmaker on the defensive line ended up, he's kicking around, for NFL training camps and stuff like that as well. So they'll lose a lot of that, kind of just steady veteran, leadership type of play. But I think the hope is on defense they can get a little bit more explosive, and those guys are going to be a big part of it.
So looking at Nebraska's schedule, because I like I said, we mentioned before, you got a pretty hefty homestand between Cincinnati, Akron, Houston Christian, and then Michigan with their new quarterback, Bryce Underwood, and then with Michigan State. Then it gets interesting on the road with Maryland and Minnesota. But the other games, of course, too, you look at going up into Happy Valley against Penn State and then having to come back home against Iowa. Is there a game you're looking forward to in this year that could be a very pivotal factor for Nebraska, especially too, because now with the new college football playoffs bracket now, it's not going to matter with the conference bid now, because you're going to have your 4 best teams right from there. And then the 5 through 12, they're going to have to battle, basically just battle out from the bottom to the top to make their way into the national championship. So is there a game you're looking forward to, and why?
Yeah, I think everybody kind of points to that Michigan game you mentioned. It'll be a really big. It's the biggest home game of the year for Nebraska, that's for sure. Michigan's trying to get off the mat a little bit from last year, even though their season ended really well with the win against Ohio State. But that's a talented team, and it could be Nebraska's chance to sort of re-announce itself. Maybe they're pushing for some top 25 votes at that point in time, or maybe they're in it, something like that. The first game of the year is the big roadblock to get to that point. and that game is against Cincinnati. It's at Arrowhead Stadium in Kansas City. There will be it's about a 3-hour drive from Omaha or Lincoln, so there will be about 60,000 probably Nebraska fans at the game, which will be a big advantage for them. So if they could get through that, I think you sort of, you look ahead, not to skip over Akron or Houston Christian, but I think Nebraska feels okay there. You're looking right ahead to that Michigan game. If they could start 4-0, they'll be feeling really good. They started 5-1 last year before the difficult part of the schedule hit, and then things got a little sticky for them. So it's not quite as top heavy or bottom heavy, I should say, this year, although that November does look difficult with those back-to-back games at the end of the season against Penn State and then Iowa on a short week on Black Friday. Although it's at home and Nebraska always plays Iowa tough. So the way I see it, I mean, there's a couple games that are going to be tricky and challenging. There's a lot of winnable ones, and then there's a couple like 50-50 games that are going to kind of decide where it ends up on the season. I think, UCLA, they played them close last year. Minnesota's always been tough on Nebraska. And going to the East Coast to Maryland in early October is probably not a huge gimme either. So it's sort of a challenging, winding road through the conference this year. But for last year for them, it was sort of, you had your nice run up and then it got really hard when, early mid-October hit. This year, it's kind of spread out a little bit more even. So we'll see if they can bring it for 12 straight.
So shifting over here to because you've covered Creighton basketball, and I will say this. I mean, I've been very impressed with this program in the last few years, and they have never ceased to amaze. And my big thing is because looking into the NIL and the transfer portal and looking at just the state of college basketball my birthday's in March. So every time when I look forward to March Madness, I always just love, not just the Cinderella stories, but I like the momentum of some of these big time programs that just have the pieces that can get them forward to a national title. So when I look at this with the NIL, I think what's interesting is the change from this season is because now you're starting to see a lot of these big name programs that we're seeing, obviously your Dukes, your North Carolinas, lots of them now that are starting to make the momentum push, because to me personally, even when I watched, the NBA, I want to get to know these players, where they're from, and the programs up from here. So covering it here from Creighton, I think this program has been very, very solid. And we know watching the tournament, it was really interesting all the way up until the end. How do you outlook this Creighton basketball program? Because knowing now with the NIL and how challenging that can be, especially with these big name programs, is that kind of something that's been lingering in Creighton's mind where they know we got to get it done? We have these guys and we're trying to get our recruits. We're trying to get some of our transfer guys. Is this kind of more of the push that Creighton wants to make a statement here going further and further into the tournament?
Yeah, I think that's pretty well said. They've done a pretty good job in the transfer portal. They've been able to build teams over the last 5 years around a really, really, an all-time great big man in their program in Ryan Kalkbrenner. So he's been the center of their defense, and last year he was the center of their offense as well. So you don't have him around anymore, and that's a big hit to what they do. But with that, after the season, Greg McDermott going into his 16th year, he announced that he was going to have a coach in waiting. He brought back Al Huss from High Point, and so he'll be leading Creighton, whether it's in a year or 2 years or 3 years, whatever it might be. But it's sooner rather than later at this point. And then Creighton really went out and they attacked the transfer portal. They got a pair of guys from Iowa, and Josh Dix and Owen Freeman, who they're really, really high on and they think can really flourish in their offense. A good transfer by the name of Nick Graves from Charlotte, who was a dynamic scorer and disher of the basketball last year, and an interesting kind of wing from Howard by the name of Blake Harper. Good player there. So, on top of the the sort of core that they had left behind with young players like Jackson McAndrew and Ty Davis and Jason Green. And so they got a lot of guys who have been around, kind of understand it. And so it'll be interesting to see where the power dynamic goes and where the ball ends up, who ends up scoring. But they will have, I think probably from a national perspective, when you think about Creighton basketball, you think about, high octane offenses that are going to shoot the three pretty well. And over the last couple of years, it hasn't necessarily been that. It's been more about kind of some defense and individual playmaking, and they've done a good job in that category. But I think this team shapes up to be another dynamic offensive group that'll shoot the three at a high rate and really will get up and down the floor. They'll might be losing a little bit on defense without Kalkbrenner back there, but they're gonna really score it this year. They should be pretty competitive.
So my final question for you before letting you go, and this is kind of something I meant to ask for someone that covers a lot of college basketball. And you've obviously covered, Nebraska and watching college football, right? And my big thing is I'm always excited for the college football season because I think the relationship between them and the NFL is just so king. We get players that get drafted every year, and these are guys that could either be day one starters or they'll be pivotal on the roster by the time that they make the 53-man roster, right? So it doesn't matter either position, whether offense, defense, or special teams. But when I look at college basketball, and the one big thing of it is that with this NIL and the transfer portal now, it's trying to shape up with keeping these guys to where they've got experience up and on their belts. Because when I watch the NBA, and I don't know if you've noticed this, but we are kind of getting into a position, it's going to take a little bit of a weird turn. And I think part of this is there's this talk about face of the league, and there's talks about, these builds of some of these organizations. I can automatically say like Washington and Charlotte. These are just like, they're these organizations that build the guys and then eventually become, a draft or trade packages for somebody that's going to want a guy that's going to be pivotal on the roster. So when you look at this in college basketball, and to me, I'm like, I think Adam Silver, he wants parity in the league. But the hard part of it is that you still have these organizations that are trying so hard. And even with this NBA lottery draft, I don't get it. It's just, to me, it's like a scratch ticket. I live here in Colorado, and we love scratch tickets. But it's like all these percentages, it don't mean nothing as long as you get into the percentage-wise. But even with that, I got Dallas getting the number 1 overall pick. So it's like, is there kind of just this thing where college basketball, they want their guys to be molded and to be prepared for when they hit the next level of the NBA, because it's a lot. Endorsement deals, branding, shoe deals. Like, how do you kind of describe the relationship between college basketball, covering it as long as you have, and with this relationship with the NBA? Is there something that needs improvement, or is there kind of something that's trending towards it might get better for this league in the next few years?
Well, I definitely think, from the college standpoint, the relationships, between coaches and players are still like massively important, especially at a place like Creighton, for example, or Nebraska, for example, where you're not, you don't have $3 million players on your roster or $5 million players on your roster. You just don't have enough of that at your fingertips to be able to pick whichever team you want based on how much you could pay them. So I think that's huge. You have to have a system and a style. And then, I think what you find eventually, and we're probably not talking about lottery picks. I think lottery picks are probably a little bit different because those guys are honestly, they're decided a long time in advance, right? We're talking about mostly 5-star recruits and guys from overseas who end up being the lottery picks. But if you get into the middle of that first round toward the rest of, into the rest of the draft, you're looking at guys who have produced at a high level at winning programs mostly, and I think that's still really, really important. And so, we're talking about Kalkbrenner before from Creighton. That's a guy who's probably going to get drafted in the back end of the first round, but he has done nothing but produce for 4 and 5 straight years. And he's had the full attention of the scouting report and stuff like that. And I do think at a certain point that that type of stuff does translate to the NBA level. Now, maybe he's not a star, but there's still a lot more other than just being one of the top 10, 20 guys in the NBA. I mean, you can make a living for a long time. Another guy from Creighton is a really good example of this, and Kyle Korver. Kyle Korver stuck around in the league forever. And he came from a winning program and won a lot, and he was a star at Creighton, but stuck around in the NBA because he did one thing really, really well. So I think that's what people are sort of looking for. Can you be elite at one thing and then be serviceable enough in other categories? And there's a bunch of guys out there, and it's really, really competitive.
Yeah, love it, man. Yeah, like I said, I mean, to me, it's like I look at the product, and there's always something to better improve to make it just even more like just worthy of watching. Like I could turn on the television and go like, oh hell yeah, I've watched this guy. He's been fantastic up in college, and now he's up here in the pros. That's the kind of stuff that I'm hoping, and it takes a little bit of time, but if we could get to that point where we got consistency up and on these builds, I think that's where the NBA, they could finally start competing. They may not trump over the NFL, but they could certainly compete up in those markets, and that's one thing that I'm really excited for. Hopefully,
it's hard to find, in the NBA, I don't think anybody knew that Shai Gilgeous-Alexander was going to win the MVP one day. The Clippers certainly didn't when they traded him to the Thunder all those years ago, right? So sometimes that stuff comes out of nowhere, and sometimes you get lucky with that. But if the NBA and coaches and officials would be smart to look at why that happened, right? Why did he become the star that he became in such a short period of time? Like, what traits and characteristics can we kind of tap into to find that in our guys? Or maybe it's just luck. I think there's a certain amount of it that's just that. And then, talking about comparing football and basketball, football's got a grip on the country, man. It's just difficult in that category. But the NBA and basketball certainly cuts out its slice of the pie, and I love basketball. I always find these conversations interesting, like who's paying attention to it. Like I am, I don't care how many other people are watching it. I'm watching it. It's great. I love it. Same thing with baseball too. So those conversations are definitely fun to have.
Oh, 100%, man. Absolutely. Love having you up and on the show, Connor. Where can people find you to get locked on the Cornhuskers this upcoming season, and also getting themselves closer into the Creighton program as well?
Yeah, we got we're on the Locked On Nebraska podcast, which you could find on YouTube or any podcasting platform, and then my daily sports talk show is on 1620 The Zone in Omaha. That show's on YouTube and whatever podcast platform you want as well. If you're on the internet, we'll be there, and it'll come to you.
There you go. All righty, tap on in, guys. Connor, appreciate you for coming on by, man. Good luck in the up-and-coming season, because I am just full of excitement for the college football season, man. Good luck to those Nebraska Cornhuskers. I think Dylan Raiola, he is the real deal, so I'm excited to see what he does here up in year 2. Appreciate you for coming on by. Enjoy the rest of the week, and we'll see you soon.
Thanks, Jake. Thanks for having me.
You bet. Yeah, like I said, I can't get enough of, just college sports in general. I mean, whether football, basketball, or even just baseball, I love it all. But, the thing is because college basketball is just so interesting, because I remember watching college basketball years ago when, I remember making a bet with, back in middle school. It was it was with my PE teacher, and they were talking about Memphis and Kansas. And at that time, that was when Derrick Rose was the big guy up in Memphis. And then there was the team of Kansas. Lots of people took the money on Memphis. But to me, and I'm just a young kid, I literally turned around and I was like, I'm going to take Kansas, because I just think ball distribution, spreading the ball out in the perimeter, and defense was going to be the key thing. And sure enough, Kansas won the national title. And so growing up and watching it, and then, of course, watching the Tyler Hansboroughs of North Carolina, the great Kentucky teams from John Wall and Michael Kidd-Gilchrist and Anthony Davis being the big protege. And then all the way down to where we got, Cooper Flagg and Duke. So to me, it's like, I'd love to hear about these kids early on and really kind of build a relationship, really get to know a lot of these players. So should be interesting, lots of fun. And I think we are trending in a direction where you're going to get a lot of these kids and they are going to be built in the best way, shape, and form. It may take a little bit of time, slow cooking, but eventually you'll start to see these guys really pop off the next few years. Going to take a break here. When we come back, we're going to be talking the latest right now that's going on in Green Bay. Jair Alexander has been cut. Then in Washington, things are not looking good between the Commanders and Terry McLaurin. We'll have a little bit more here to say coming up after the break. All right, folks. Well, since 1953, Maker's Mark has been leaving their mark as one of the best of the best Kentucky straight bourbon. And they made their mark just by the red marker that you'll always see on the top of every single bottle. There's always a story to be told, and there's always a mark to be left. And their mark was to be the best of the best Kentucky straight bourbon that you've ever tasted, ever poured on a glass, and just enjoyed it with either friend, family, coworker, wherever you leave your mark. Pick up a bottle of Maker's Mark and make your mark on whatever it may be. Enjoy it responsibly, 21 and over, and check it out for yourself. And I leave my mark here all the time here onto this show. So leave your mark with Maker's Mark Kentucky Straight Bourbon, 21 plus, enjoy responsibly.
Want to find your seat for the event of your choice but can't get one that fits your desire or your budget? Well, my friends, SeatGeek has you covered. SeatGeek is the official sponsor of the Snake Sports Talk Show. With a list of over hundreds of events to choose from, SeatGeek will assure you that you won't miss your seat with the amazing deal of your choice at the most affordable price. Whether it's looking for your best seat in the house of your favorite sports team, finding live concerts that get you closer to your favorite artist, or enjoying your spot at your favorite live shows, comedies, and more, SeatGeek has it all just for you. Go online to SeatGeek.com or download the app on your mobile device through Google Play and the App Store. And as a special offer before checkout, use promo code SNAKESPORTS and save yourself $20 off of your purchase of your first ticket and experience why SeatGeek is the most trusted ticketing app for your next event. Remember, that's SeatGeek.com and download the app on your phone with promo code SNAKESPORTS for $20 off and find your seat with SeatGeek.
Looking for a show with the best takes and opinions? Want a show with the best coverage around the world of sports? Jam-packed with an all-star interview lineup? Then the best place to find it all, sports and entertainment, is right here. Join Jake Silva on the Snake Sports Talk Show, presented by SeatGeek and BetUS. Weeknights at 8 p.m. Eastern, 5 Pacific on Sports Wave Network.
Snake Sports Talk Show is sponsored by Muscle Tech, with hundreds of supplements and vitamins to choose from, all packed with 100% all-natural proven ingredients. You can be sure that Muscle Tech will give you the edge and the boost to train and look like your fit and healthy best, whatever your goals are. Try Muscle Tech today and use promo code SNAKESPORTS to save 30% off your purchases.
So it was just announced early this morning out of Green Bay, Wisconsin, that the Green Bay Packers have officially released Jair Alexander. And I thought that this was interesting because of a few reasons. So number one is they released him early before June 12th. So if they actually released him on that day of June 12th, they would have saved up $7.5 million in cap space. But instead, they decided to release him early. And Jair Alexander, let's be honest, I think he's a very good corner and very serviceable for teams that could use a veteran corner. Now, he may not be the number one star on a defense, but he could be serviceable wherever that he goes. Now, there are many teams that have looked into Jair Alexander, and my big thing is that he's going to work in any defense. I think he'll work in any defense. But the thing is, I don't think that he would necessarily be that number one corner that we've watched in years past. And I think part of that is because accumulated injuries was kind of the biggest thing that really hurt the potential. But the other thing is I just think Jair Alexander, because they were paying $22 million per year on his contract. And that was the one thing they tried to find a suitor to take on that contract. So Jair Alexander, some of the landing spots, and we looked at this here courtesy of CBS Sports, but the landing spots they found was the Dolphins, the Niners, the Eagles, the Rams, the Ravens, the Vikings, the Cowboys, and the Falcons. There may be two others that I would maybe add on to this list as well. I think if you look at it, I think the LA Chargers could be up in play. They've been inquiring about Jair Alexander in the past, and now that he is officially released, my big thing is I think he would be somebody willing to play on a 1-year, $10 million contract, maybe even 12, because they try to at least make it half up and on the restructuring, but that wasn't moving anything. So now the good news is about Green Bay is that they have a very good safety in Xavier McKinney. He's a star. The other thing is that they've got a couple of young corners that I think could step in a role and really help out this Green Bay secondary. But with Jair Alexander, I understand it too. It might take a hit for the Packers. But I look at this and looking at these top landing spots. Here's my thing about this. Dallas could be interesting because you have Deron Bland and Trayvon Diggs. And I think Jair is capable of playing at least a bit of man-to-man corner, but he can also play a little bit up and in the slots. And the one thing of it is they already have that slot corner with Trayvon Diggs. He's somebody that can be that spotter and somebody that can honestly go there and go and get interceptions. So that's really what made him produce well. So even if you did some solid rotations up from there, that could be an interesting destination. The Philadelphia Eagles, this would be screaming Howie Roseman in a heartbeat. And the only reason of that is because if you recall, they got rid of Darius Slay, and now he's playing up in Pittsburgh. He's playing his final year up in there. And you always want to have a veteran voice there with Jair. And the thing is, they got young players with Cooper DeJean, and you've also got Quinyon Mitchell, who they both were impactful. So Philadelphia could be an interesting destination. Minnesota, to me, that's an interesting one considering the fact they lost one corner, but they still have the other on an extension. Baltimore could be a very good one only because you got a young corner in Nate Wiggins, who I really like, who is capable of playing the man-to-man coverage. And not to mention, it's a pretty good solid rotation between him and Marlon Humphrey. The other thing is, too, I thought the Falcons were really interesting considering the fact that you got Jesse Bates, the safety. You've also got A.J. Terrell. And I think this is also one of their steals, but one of the undrafted free agents, Kobe Bryant, he could be very impactful for this defensive secondary. So adding Jair Alexander on that on a cheap deal could be really interesting. But again, I think there are a couple of teams that could really use a veteran corner like Jair. But I don't think he will be necessarily in a position where he'll be that number one corner like he was in the past. So that's the one thing you kind of have to keep an eye on for. But still, if you could get the best out of Jair and at least have him serviceable where he's not going to play all 17 games. maybe if you get lucky enough, if he plays about 12 to 13 and then takes, a couple rests from here, that could help. And even with splitting some of the snaps, that could be something that could be intriguing. But again, keep your eyes out on the two other teams that I looked at. The Chargers could be one of them. And if I looked at it, I think even the Arizona Cardinals could even look at him too. Because you got a young corner in Will Johnson, who when he dropped in the draft, that was actually a pretty good draft spot, especially at his value. I know the injury and all the rest of it is what it is, but at that value that the Arizona Cardinals got, can't say no to that. And the Chargers, what's scary interesting about this is Asante Samuel Jr. has yet to sign with a team. And you got to remember, he had shoulder surgery in the past, and he's rehabbing from that. And who knows what the rehab process looks like for someone like Asante Samuel Jr. And they just picked up Dante Jackson. They got two really good corners I like, Cam Hart and Tariq Steele, who were actually really good steals in the late rounds. And they also got Benjamin St-Juste. So they could use a veteran corner, and even after they lost Christian Fulton to Kansas City in free agency, they could use somebody, veteran experience, really good complementary piece to Jesse Minter's defense. I would expect that to be pretty tasty and intriguing for the Chargers up from here. But that's going to be up to the front office and Joe Ortiz. If that is somebody that you could bring in on a veteran-friendly deal, maybe Jair Alexander would consider that. But I still think he could be an important piece, maybe just not the superstar piece that we were used to seeing in the last few years before the injuries started accumulating. Here we go with the news.
This is the Hot Press.
So lots of news that came around, and it was all based up in the NFL. So we're going to take a look at some things here. So far, just an update. The Florida Panthers are leading 1-0 right now in the first period as the series is tied here in Game 3. So the Boston Red Sox, and we do have a fellow guest that's going to be coming on this week talking about the Boston Red Sox, but the top prospect, Roman Anthony, has been called up, and he's going to be starting here for the Boston Red Sox after they just beat the New York Yankees and winning the series up from there. The hopeful can provide a jolt in the team that has disappointed over the season's first 67 games. So Anthony starting in right field and batting fifth here tonight against the Tampa Bay Rays. What manager Alex Cora ended up mentioning is we're trying to win ball games. The kid has done an amazing job getting ready for this moment. We're excited. It's a big day for the organization. Roman Anthony, the 21-year-old, arrives in the big leagues with polished rare for a player at his age. The second-round pick in 2022, blitzed through the minor leagues, reaching Double-A in his first full season in 23, dominating between Double-A and Triple-A in 24, and crushing Triple-A pitching with his left-handed swing thus far. And so looking at Roman Anthony, throughout it, he was batting .288 with 10 homers and 29 RBIs and 265 plate appearances in AAA. So this kid, 6'3", 200-pounder, he's exciting to watch. And I think this kid's going to have a bright future in Boston, but they certainly needed to get some sort of jolt up and on this offense. And again, it's been kind of streaky with them. That's why they've had a lot of these youngsters kind of call up to compete in the AL East. Moving on. So going into the NHL, we say a happy retirement to a veteran forward of the Washington Capitals, TJ Oshie, has officially announced retirement after 16 NHL seasons. TJ Oshie ended up announcing his retirement as well in front of hundreds of fans that gathered around at the fountains at the Washington Harbor in Georgetown. 7 years to the day after one of the most memorable Cup celebrations in hockey history. The president of hockey operations, Brian McClellan, and general manager Chris Patrick, coach Spencer Carberry, who also won the Jack Adams Award, and longtime teammates John Carlson and Nicholas Backstrom also came out to support. TJ Oshie mentioned this. My only contribution was that this could be a good day, a place to have ceremony. I can't thank the Caps enough. Another first-class move by them to have my retirement here, invite all the people out. It really made this day special. So the announcement had been expected for quite some time. With Oshie's contract expiring, the 38-year-old did not play this past season because of a nagging back injury that sidelined him off and on and going on to the LTIR. TJ Oshie, as we mentioned, Stanley Cup champion. He was taken in the 24th. He was taken 24th in the 2005 draft by the St. Louis Blues, playing 1,116 regular season and playoff games in the league with the Blues and the Capitals since making his debut in 2008, where he had scored 336 goals, 428 assists, and 764 points, including 21 points during Washington's Cup run in 2018. So, happy retirement to TJ Oshie. He's also somebody that was very pivotal in USA's hockey team going on to win the medal. And TJ Oshie, he's a great class act in hockey. And, to see him make his farewell, sad day, but loved seeing it from one of the best in the league. Happy retirements, enjoying retirement as well. Thank you so much for the memorable years that you've spent in the league, TJ Oshie. All right, so interesting here. So the Colts have now formalized the transition, moving on to the NFL again. The Indianapolis Colts, since the passing of the late Jim Irsay, the Colts revealed the ownership transition to Jim Irsay's daughters. So the next generation has been made official. So the Colts announced today the awakening of, in the wake of longtime owner Jim Irsay's passing last month. The eldest daughter, Carly Irsay Gordon, will assume the role of owner and CEO and has been designated principal owner. So the NFL bylaws require the teams designate a single principal owner, even in scenarios where the franchise are under family control. Casey Foy will be owner and executive vice president, while youngest sister Kaylin Jackson will be owner and chief brand officer. Jackson will also be president of the Indianapolis Colts Foundation. So most of this is going to be at the eldest daughter, Carly Irsay Gordon, will be the owner, but it's going to be transitioned by all three of the daughters. So, but I think Carly, she's going to have her hands on everything of what's happening in the Colts operations. And so, to me, this could be a turning of a new leaf for the Indianapolis Colts. And we know that Jim Irsay really has contributed a lot to the organization and even to the organization's foundations and their charity. So I think Carly's going to honestly, and it's funny because we see these transitions all the time. I mean, we watched the Detroit Lions transition in the Ford family to where now the daughter of the Ford family, she's taken over, and she's the reason that helped to hire Brad Holmes and hire Dan Campbell. And because trying to turn over a new culture in a losing organization that has dealt with nothing but heartbreaks in the last few years. So to see this happen, I think the Colts in the last few years, since Andrew Luck retired in 2019, they just have not found their star quarterback. And Anthony Richardson, we know, he'll be back by training camp is what we're told, but he was dealing with a shoulder injury. So we don't know what Anthony Richardson might look like, but this is why they got Daniel Jones. This is why that, they did all of this. But if the Colts could honestly turn a new leaf, because we're watching the Indiana Pacers in the final, we're watching Caitlin Clark with the Indiana Fever. Lots of things happening in the state of Indiana, but we know the Colts. We know in Indianapolis, they're mostly known for their scouting combine, which is fantastic. I have yet to go. But again, I think if the Colts, they could turn a new direction, this could be interesting for years to come. So I'm excited about it and interested to see what this goes on. All right, so that takes care of the news.
This is the Hot Press.
Kind of, discussing about this situation with so I think this is interesting here. So there's a piece of news that was happening again in Cincinnati, and once again, they're still trying to figure out the Trey Hendrickson and the Shamar Stewart deal. So the Bengals have released longtime linebacker Jermaine Pratt. I don't really know if I like this. I really don't know if I like this. Because Jermaine Pratt, he was in the final year of his 3-year contract extension that he signed in 23. And the 29-year-old, he's going to be looking for a new job. He'll probably be signed with a team that's going to need a veteran linebacker. And Jermaine Pratt, the Bengals will incur a $2.3 million cap charge, but they will gain $5.9 million in savings. Where is that going to go to? It's probably going to go to either extensions or rookie deal. It's going to be one of the two. But as far as in the linebacking position is concerned, this kind of concerns me. But I'm not surprised with the Cincinnati Bengals, considering the fact they've mostly been playing this thing cheap. And when you look at this, how do I even know that the Cincinnati Bengals, their defense got better? I mean, they spent a lot of money ensuring that Joe Burrow's got his 2 top targets, and you also gave Mike Gesicki a nice raise. But we know this, that the NFL, what's happened is that we've seen this a couple years ago where it was very highly offense. They scored a lot of points. It was actually the most amount of points that's ever been made in league history. Last year it took a dip because most of the time it's been more trench warfare than anything else. Ground and pound, run the football. Defenses were getting tougher. And I think we're going to see that again with either linebackers, edge rushers, and so on and so forth. But we did not see a ton of scoring all throughout the season. Yeah, we've had run-up scores here and there, but it was not a ton of scoring like what 2 years ago gave us. And the Bengals, we know, missed the playoffs last season. Outside looking in, they can't afford to miss the playoffs again. And if this is going to be one of the moves that is going to guarantee it'll be either going toward the contract extension or it will be going toward the rookie deal that Shamar Stewart has yet to sign. I don't know. I really don't know with Cincinnati. I'm trying to stay as optimistic with this organization as much as I can for as cheap as they are, but they're not making it easy. And so, who knows? I mean, I talk a lot about the Pittsburgh Steelers, this Aaron Rodgers deal, but Cincinnati, once again, still proving to me that they're trying to open up more cap space and they're just trying to make things right. And a lot of that is because Joe Burrow, and we all know this, he's got his hands on this whole thing. So we'll see. I'm curious to where that's going to get distributed because, again, Shamar Stewart, he's still left with a rookie contract deal that he hasn't signed. And then there's Trey Hendrickson still awaiting an extension deal, and you can't make everybody happy. You got to pick one or the other, and it's hard, especially when you're in a smaller market like Cincinnati. It's very, very difficult. So I thought this was interesting. 2 minutes left. But the Houston Texans made an interesting move, and I actually kind of like this. So the Houston Texans made a deal with former Cleveland Browns running back Nick Chubb, 1 year, $2.5 million that could be upward of $5 million in incentive. So this means that the Texans have a pretty hefty running back core, consisting of Joe Mixon, Dameon Pierce, and Woody Marks out of USC. And they've also got one other running back. But Nick Chubb, and this is the one thing that I even talked about with Jair Alexander, is you're not going to expect Nick Chubb to be the superstar that he was up in Cleveland. And mind you, Nick Chubb had a history of knee injuries, especially on ACL. He's hurt both of them. He's hurt both his knees. I remember the time in Georgia in college, like he tore his ACL, got back up, and he was arguably one of the best. I think he was more of like that. He was more of like that bulldog rusher, right? You know, he kind of busts through the defensive line, and he's going to give you some very good speed and power. So Nick Chubb going to Houston, and I think this is kind of what Houston's identity is. They're a very physical force on defense. They can run the ball efficiently, and especially if you could do rotational rounds between Joe Mixon, Nick Chubb, and then with Dameon Pierce. Now, Dameon Pierce kind of took a bit of a drop-off, and people are kind of skeptical about what he's going to look like this upcoming season. I'm not worried. I think he'll bounce back, but not in a big way. He'll be a contributor. But Houston, and I think this all kind of goes back to the identity that D'Amico Ryans has. And this is important because we know that the offensive line, it's going to be very challenging for CJ Stroud. But you got to hope that at least with the guards and even with the tackles, they'll still run the ball efficiently. But Joe Mixon's been known for that. And even when coming into Houston last season, Joe Mixon was a Pro Bowler. And he looked just fine. People were thinking he kind of took a slight step back, but he didn't. But adding Nick Chubb to this, I think Houston wants to make a case to get further in the playoffs rather than just one and done. You know, rather than just winning the first round, going into the divisional, and then they lose that. I think they want to make a case to get further on. But it's not easy, especially in the AFC. AFC is tough. AFC is very quarterback top heavy. And especially with what we see with CJ Stroud. And I'm going to be thinking the same thing with Jordan Love. Because we know Green Bay, I mean, losing Jair Alexander is one thing, but you got Josh Jacobs. But you better hope that hefty run game, especially with Marshawn Lloyd, it'll produce better. But I think Houston is still going to be in good shape. They got a great coach. They've got a pretty healthy culture, considering the fact about what Nick Casario's done. So adding in another veteran piece, this is just kind of what Houston is. This is their identity. Physical force, ground and pound run game, and I think also, too, implementing a lot of the play action passes. That's the stuff that really will help CJ Stroud produce at his absolute best. So I think Houston, they'll be just fine in the division. I'm not thinking it's going to change. I do believe that Tennessee will improve. As far as the Colts, I'm really questionable about their quarterback position. I don't trust it as much. But then you also have Jacksonville, who is just Jacksonville. It's still not moving. They'll be better, but after you traded away a first-round pick next year to Cleveland, who's going to have two, part of the reasons why that you're still a top 10 draftee every year. So South could be interesting, but I trust Houston, and I think they're in good hands. All righty, folks. That's going to do it here for me on the Snake Sports Talk Show. Shout out to Connor Happer for joining us here on the show, talking Nebraska and Creighton. No show tomorrow, but we are back on Wednesday here on the show, and we got more and more guests coming up on the up-and-coming weeks. Appreciate all of you for tuning on in. Jake Silva signing off. Have a wonderful rest of your Monday, and we will see you guys up on Wednesday on the Snake Sports Talk Show. Take care, everyone. Take care of each other.